Welcome back to Disrupting the Algorithm, a monthly check in with our Disruptors Network where we talk to alumni, past mentors, instructors, actors, directors, and anyone who has been part of our Disruptors family. My name is Julio Salgado, and I am the co creator of the Disruptors Fellowship, a program from the Center for Cultural Power. Today's Disrupting the Algorithm guest is TV writer and Disruptors mentor, Katherine Beattie. Yay! A little bit about Catherine. Catherine has been working in television for well over a decade and has held various assistant jobs on series for Showtime, ABC, and Freeform before landing at NCIS New Orleans, where she served as the script coordinator for the first three seasons before being staffed as a writer and becoming a co-executive producer on season 20 of NCIS. Most recently, Catherine worked in the development room for Peter Gould's new project at FX, Breaking Bad. Catherine, Breaking Bad family. Catherine has been supporting our program since we started back in 2020 with her mentorship and coaching. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello, thanks for having me, Julio.
Thank you so much for joining us so early in the morning. I
Of
mean,
course, I'm always thrilled whenever we get a chance to speak, and especially about disruptors, because I love you guys.
oh, and we love you. We love you. Listen, we love to connect with mentors specifically who are passionate about the mission of our program. And you're, of course, one of those folks. But Catherine, before we get into our conversation, you're, by the way, our seventh guest.
Oh,
Yay.
wow.
Lucky seven. I always like to kick off this conversations by asking our guests what piece of art, and it could be a book, it could be a TV show, an artist perhaps, but what is something that you are consuming, what a piece of art you're consuming right now that is making you excited about creating?
hmm Well, I often fall back into rewatching old comfort shows
Yep.
a lot. And for me, those are things like the Golden Girls classic holds up even to this day. Felicity, that kind of stuff. Got so much going on in the day that at night I just like to watch some good classic television and think this is a standard I would love to meet. So that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm always listening to the greatest artist of our generation, Kelly Clarkson. If anyone follows me on social media, they know I'm not shy about being her biggest fan. And yeah, but just really anything that at the end of the day that can put me in kind of a relaxed state and prep me to be creative.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear you on the, shows that, comfort shows, right? Like last guest was Zachary, Stevens, who was one of our mentors. And, they always suggest watching pilots to kind
Hmm
of, get your brain started. And so I've been doing that. I've been watching a lot of pilots. Felicity was one of the pilots that I saw recently. Ally McBeal was another one that was like, I remember watching Ally McBeal when it was on TV when I was in high
hmm
school. That show actually started 2 years after I arrived to this country, so I didn't really quite understand but it takes you, it definitely takes you to a comfort, zone. I also watched to prepare for our interview. I watched the pilot for NCIS,
the original.
2003.
Oh
2000.
my gosh, wow. I have seen it. I saw it eventually, but I was in high school when that was on, and it's just crazy that that show has endured, So, but isn't it funny? You watch it and the aspect ratio is different, and just the cameras, and it's just so old.
It's old, but I don't know because it's same. But when that show came out, I was already in college,
Mhm.
so I'm a little older. And so I remember thinking how high tech that show looked at the time,
Yeah,
and looking back at it, I'm like, it's still. I mean, I don't know. It still holds.
yeah,
Interesting,
it
interesting.
does. I mean, they're on Air Force One in the pilot. They go for it.
I mean,
So
then President Bush was
yeah,
a
and I
main
think that's
character.
that's like an example in a pilot of like just really starting strong right out the gate.
Yes.
I feel like TV has changed so much in the last 20, 25 years where especially now like shows aren't given the opportunity to like grow and find an audience. So when I'm working on a pilot, when I'm mentoring other writers and they're working on pilots, I'm like you got to make sure this hits because like you're if it doesn't grab your audience right away, like they're yanking it off the air. So that is a I think that's a really good example of just like foot on the
Strong.
gas right out the gate, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So listen, if you're watching this, watch all the pilots from some of your favorite shows. I think that's a common advice that we get. But Catherine, you've been our official writing coach for the past years of our program. You didn't ask for the job, but I was like, you did it the first time, and then you keep returning, saying yes to us, so we thank you.
Oh, you're
Um,
welcome.
and the fellows have spoken very highly of your mentorship. Can you speak about your how mentorship has been instrumental in your own career?
Yeah. Like just so thankful to be a part of programs like Disruptors that offers mentorship opportunities because I never really had anything formal like this when I was coming up in my career. And it was all very organic, like you said in my bio, I worked in many assistant jobs. So when I was an assistant, it was all about like hustling, trying to like prove myself and like hopefully just getting a writer to like take me under their wing, and just like learned so much from those people. I have one coworker, an amazing writer named Stephanie Sengupta. A couple years ago, she like came into my office and I was a lower level writer at the time, and she was just like, I would like to be your mentor. And I was like, yes, I would love to have you. But I feel like that is pretty rare for people to just go ahead and offer. Um, so for me, it's really just kind of come out of organic relationships, but I have learned so much in terms of writing and just like how to be in a room and just kind of how to survive this business. And I think for anyone, regardless of the level you're at, whether you're just starting out or you're, co-EP, showrunner, whatever, like everybody needs kind of that lifeline and someone like a neutral party to bounce things off of. So it's really been instrumental in my career, even though I haven't really gone through like well, I guess what you would call like formal mentorship paths.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I always, for me personally, the mentors that I've had, I always tell people, I'm like, if there's somebody that you admire, like shoot your shot. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
nothing, you just what the worst thing that they can say is like, I have no time for you.
Hmm.
But at least your curiosity over like whether or not they can help you, right? And always be ready to show your work and be ready. Like I think one of the things that I always suggest for you mentors is and the mentees as well, the fellows, is like talk about how they want to be supported, right? Like I
Hmm.
think a lot of there's no formula for this mentorship program or it's just the relationship. So it's really about, hey, what do you want? Like any relationship,
Yes.
how do you want to navigate this relationship? What are your needs and how can I support you? And so I think of mentorship, this way. Now from you mentioned, and I mentioned it in your bio about the various jobs you
Mhm.
held, script coordinator, staff writer, co-executive producing, in the world of NCIS. Um, and because of you work in NCIS, I almost see you as like a TV procedural queen. That's how I think of you. Uh,
Yeah.
but what is it about this genre that has kept you on for so long?
Well, to be honest, a large part of it is the stability,
Mhm.
because they don't make shows of this model very often anymore that, 22 to 24 episodes a year just continue. That's how I was lucky enough to get staff was finally landing on a show that didn't get canceled, or, just go one season. And coming from doing assistant jobs out in Showtime, which shows that I like loved and admired, so creative. It was like 6 months of work a year. So I really wanted to get a network just like to be able to pay my rent. Cause I was like that, then I'll work all year long and kind of just fell into NCIS New Orleans on the first season. Like watched procedural, but really had not very much interest in working on a procedural.
Mhm.
At the time, like one of my favorite specs and to this day, one of my favorite scripts I've written is a spec for Breaking Bad. And so I like thought, yeah, like that's what I'm going to go do. But I landed on NCIS New Orleans, and in the first season, we were all in the thick of it together, just trying to get that show off the ground. And I learned so much so quickly about so many things, structure and like how to keep your audience engaged and just how to tell a story. And over the years of working on procedurals, I found, things to love about them. For me, I'm not super into, writing the police case of the week, but I think the reason why shows like NCIS have been on for 20 plus years is that audiences really like fall in love with the characters. And so that's kind of what I started to gravitate towards. I usually would find like one character that I absolutely loved and try to write stories for them and just really lean into that. And the nice thing about working on shows that go on for so long is like you really get to know these characters as people and you're so fully invested in them. So I think it's just kind of that long-term relationship that you build with the characters you're writing and the people that you're working with that makes like a procedural kind of a really special environment to work in.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean there's something oddly comforting about
Mhm.
procedurals. Like I know that I can be anywhere in the country, and like an Law and Order or
Mhm.
NCIS will come on, and I know there's, it feels like home. Like it feels like home, which is weird because a lot of the actual content is
Mhm.
pretty dark.
Yep.
Why do you think procedurals are so popular? Is it the formula? You mentioned about like the characters, but what is it about that people love watching these shows that are very dark in content?
Yeah, I really think it is the formula and the formulaic nature of the show. I think like at the end of the day, like if you sit down and think about it, you know how it's gonna end.
Yeah.
Before like they're gonna catch the bad guy, right? And within that genre, it's sometimes unfortunate who we choose to villainize, but that's kind of a different conversation. But at the end of the day, the people that you root for every week are going to get a win, and I think people like to see that, and that's kind of like why I think those are like comfort shows. They're shows that you can watch while you're making dinner or folding your laundry or whatever because they don't require the amount of like brain space that something like a Succession or Game of Thrones where you have to be glued to the television or and I think like there's just a lot it's a nice feeling to have something that can be like kind of an easy watch. And then just speaking to the dark content of it all, I think unfortunately we as television viewers and consumers of media get so desensitized so quickly to a lot of that stuff. So if you don't sit down and consciously think about what you're watching, it's kind of easy to gloss over that.
Yeah.
Um, which is why, when we're telling these stories, and this is something that I was working on before Disruptors, but I feel like have been building on just in the years that I've been working with Disruptors is being really intentional about the kind of stories we choose to tell. Because even if your audience isn't paying 100% attention, it's seeping in. It's in the back of their mind, and I think we really have an opportunity to shape culture that way. So it's being intentional about the stories we choose to tell.
Yeah, and 100%, and it's growing up. Unfortunately, a lot of the times that I saw myself on TV or like people from my community, also being a gay man, I cannot tell you how many DL stories where they turn out to be the assassin.
Yeah.
It was dark, but and please tell me if I'm wrong here, but given the history of procedurals and the way that the other is usually written, I imagine that you had to kind of confront plot lines that might seem problematic. As someone who as someone
Mhm.
you who advocates for disability justice, what advice do you give new writers when they find, and they
Mhm.
will eventually find themselves in a writer's room,
Yes.
where they have to choose between being an advocate or a writer? How do you balance those
Yeah.
two things?
Well, I always tell them, it gets easier as you move up the ladder and gain more seniority and you have a little bit more freedom and leeway to voice these opinions. But, as staff writers, you're in such a tricky position because you come into this room and you have stories you want to tell and you're so excited and then, you know, you're confronted with something that you're like, oh, like this doesn't sit well with me, but I don't know how to bring this to the room in a way that's not gonna, to be honest, like harm my career because it's so difficult, especially people who are coming from historically excluded backgrounds to like make it in this industry. So I always tell the fellows, and this is something that I did as well, is try to find that more senior writer that you're on the same wavelength with, because you will find those people in the room and try to get that person to back you. Maybe take your concerns like privately to that person and be like, hey, I'm feeling some kind of way about this story. What do you think? How do you think we could address it? And I've definitely had situations like that early in my career where something just it didn't feel right or authentic, and we were able to open up a larger discussion to the room and kind of like change things. And but it's like that tricky thing I think you mentioned between like threading the line between like politics
Yeah.
of the room and wanting to be true to yourself and your story and your community. And but I think it's really important to like stand up for your own morals at the end of the day. So if something is just, you don't have to put your name on something that doesn't speak to the stories you want to tell. It's just it can be a difficult choice sometimes.
Yeah, and I can almost see how I mean, an advice that I've heard in the past when it comes to confronting this kind of issues is, a lot of the times, as someone who might be dealing with a lot of these things, that you see a plot line that is
Mhm.
problematic, it's a reactionary,
Mhm.
thing to like speak up. But I've heard an advice to like, well, try to come up with a solution or like get
Yes.
creative, like, coming up with solution. And because yeah, you're right. This is my job. How do I
Mhm.
bring something up, right, without losing my job? And I think this is a good exercise as a creative. Like, well, can we come up with a solution? Because if somebody came up with this plot line who may
Mhm.
not be part of those communities, they are not going to have the answer.
Right, right. And I think you have to realize that 9 times out of 10, if somebody comes up with a story that following that isn't sitting right or is somewhat problematic, it's 9 times out of 10, there's no malice in it. It's just it's because we just ingest the stories that we've already seen on television. And so for so long we've been seeing the same story. And so somebody who's not from that community thinks, oh, this is my only exposure to this community is on television. So I'm gonna keep repeating the same stories because they work. And so it's not about going to that person and saying like, no, you're totally wrong. This is a bad story to tell. It's, hey, I don't know if you've thought about this in possibly this other way, but would it be more interesting if we explored it from this angle? And there's so much. It's yes, always about providing solutions, regardless of whatever the note is, but also the approach and like honoring that person's like creative spirit and also the fact that like we all just want to tell good stories but we don't know what we don't know. I know you said you did some background acting on Vita, and that's one of my favorite shows, because to be honest, I'm from Los Angeles. I'm from 10 miles from where Vita takes place. And that world was so foreign to me before I started watching Vita. And I'm like, I cannot believe that this is in my backyard. and I'm as old as I am, and this is new to me. And so if we can put more of those stories on television, more of those authentic stories, we'll have fewer and fewer instances where we have to confront the other
Yeah.
scenario, you know?
Yeah, and I mean you hit it right on the nail, right? Like you don't know what you don't know,
Mhm.
and no show is going to be perfect. Like even a show like Vida, right? Like they got a lot of backlash for,
Mhm.
the way that some topics were addressed, but I'm like Vida was a groundbreaking show
Mhm.
because of the stories that it was telling. And yes, I was in the back. If you see episode 3, in the first season, they had my artwork. Shout out to Tanya Saracho, who their team reached out and they wanted to use my artwork, as a background. Were you interested in acting too, or like, was it paying the bill, like being a background actor?
Yes, so I did background acting for about 8 months.
Yeah.
I started my career at the Ellen DeGeneres show, and worked there for a year, and quickly discovered, for no other reason than I just discovered I wanted to write narrative, and I didn't want to work on a talk show. So I quit that show with another job semi lined up, and then that show got canceled, and so I found myself unemployed and started doing background acting to pay the bills. And I did start to get to the point where I like enjoyed it. And I don't know if anybody who's watching this out there does background acting, but it's like a real hustle to like get jobs and all this stuff. And I had like a little crew of like background actors, and we'd all get jobs together. And it was kind of fun. And I got to that point and I was like, oh, I gotta get out of here and get a different job. So there's things to like about it. And of course it was so great to just be on set. It was like, just to have that access. I did subsequently start taking acting classes, just because I think it's something good for writers to do, and I enjoy them very much. But if I can be honest, acting is not where my strengths lie. I am not good at it. So it is something that I enjoy, but there's no second career in that for me at
It,
all.
I mean, you definitely have it. It's not a hobby, like any art, like any. I saw, when I first did it, I went, I showed up, and it was really exciting. The cameras and
Mhm.
what I also, again, shout out to be that, seeing a bunch of writers, the majority of color. I think it was an all Latinx
Mhm.
writers room. That actually was one of the things that inspired me to co-create the Disruptors. And I'm like, how do we have more of this?
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm like, oh, the background actors, this is what they are passionate
Yeah.
about. I did not have that. And so
Yes.
out of respect, and I think being an actor, I talk to my actor friends, and I'm like, oh my God, you go to these places where they tell you like what's wrong with you and what
Yeah.
I could not. I could.
It's so hard. And I'm sure the rates have risen since I did it, but back then it was $57 a day if you were not in the union. So it's like you gotta be like again, I was just trying to pay some bills, but you gotta be passionate about this
Yeah.
kind of stuff if you're gonna do it for that. And yeah, it's like with any art,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not a hobby and it's a craft and you have to work at it. And I think people who don't do what we do think, oh, it's so easy because I can memorize lines or I can hold a pen. Like I can and it's
When the cameras are in front of you and
yeah.
you're like, even if it's like you're gonna, am I doing it right? Is the camera?
Yeah, like what am I doing with my hands? It's yeah.
It's something else. Now, you mentioned, the current, when we were talking earlier, about, the current state of the industry, right?
Mhm.
Getting jobs. What do you think is the biggest misconception that new writers right now have about the state in the current state of the industry, whether it's bad or it's good? Misconceptions, like what are the things that perhaps we might not be privy of unless you're like in it.
Yeah. To be honest, I try not to think too much about the current state of the industry. I have been unemployed for almost a year. Like in I think next week it'll be a year, which coming from procedural, I worked 11 months a year for a decade. So that was a very strange, this has been a very strange experience for me.
Yeah.
But so I suddenly found myself in the same boat as everyone else because for a very long time I was in a very special place where I didn't have to worry about any of this. And then it was a little bit of a wake up to me about the current state of the industry. I see two extremes a lot with new writers, and I definitely did the first, which is that you show up to town with the script and you assume someone's going to buy it and make it, and you're going to be on the stage at the Emmys next year. Like that's just like everybody comes in with that confidence, right?
Yeah.
So I see that. And then I'm like, let's temper our expectations a little bit. And then, but just recently, I'm running into a lot more discouragement because there are so few jobs out there compared to the boom we had in the last couple of years. And I just try to remind these writers, like well, I was an assistant for 8 years before I got staffed, which is a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight. But if it's something you're passionate about and you keep on knocking on those doors, one of them is going to open. So yeah, so it's like kind of these two extremes of misconceptions, and it's somewhere in the middle. But just realize that this is a very difficult life, and it works out really well for some of us,
Yeah.
and and not for others. And so you have to be willing to, put in the work if this is the art you want to make, and just accept that there's going to be some lean times, but when you get there, it's so worth it to be able to create something and then put it out and have, in my case, on something like an NCIS, like 13 million people watch something that you've written. It's just, there's no feeling like it in the world. It's just a very long journey to get there.
Yeah, yeah, it's worth it. But I definitely, I was listening to the Nicole Byer podcast, and she had their guests were the writers from the new Naked Gun movie,
Mhm.
and I forget their names, but they basically they were like, no matter what you get in your career, that fear never goes away. That how are you gonna get the next job? So
Yeah.
like I guess accepting that this is the reality,
Mhm.
that you're going into an industry that is very fickle, but it's like, but what is, your passion is to tell a story, right? And
Mhm.
and that takes me to, my next question, right? Like, we keep telling writers that if they have not been staffed, keep working on their craft and find a way to tell their stories, whether it's like stand up,
Mhm.
self-publish, write your own skit. What is a piece of advice that new writers are not hearing enough of? Like, what is an advice that you think new writers should be aware?
Um, I think that, along the lines of what you just said, like keep telling your story and be authentic and don't try to, and experienced writers that like myself are guilty of this sometimes too, but don't try to like chase the market or write something that you think other people are gonna like. Um, Try to just be as original and authentic as possible, especially in the writing coaching. I always try to differentiate between like something that's a sample that you want to like use to get jobs and something that you're trying to sell, because those are two different things. If you're a new writer and you're just like you're trying to make your mark and get your name out there, like be as original as possible and make sure people remember your name when they read your stuff. Like, don't make it sound like everyone else. But that's just a scary thing to do, to put so much work into a project and know it's probably never going to get made, but hopefully it will, get my name out there to a point that eventually I can make something. But yeah, I think it would be that. It's just like authenticity is really important.
Yeah, yeah, and keeping at it.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I just I again, right? Like it's this thing that I was talking to my husband last night, and I was like, being an artist, and like especially when you're like telling stories about your life, it's a thing that I cannot explain. I can help but do, right? Like I
Mhm.
just do, in
Mhm.
my comic strip that I write, it's about my experience as an immigrant, and I need to like let it out. I cannot explain why I do
Yes.
it, but it's just something that it's in us. I don't know.
Yeah. I actually like I will tell people when they ask about like a career in writing or becoming a writer, I'll often say that like unless you have something that you like, you have to do this. Like you, if you don't feel like this is something you have to do, don't do it. Yeah, because it is like we said, it's a difficult, unpredictable life. And if you can be happy doing something else, like God bless, go do that. But like for so many of us, it's like no, like this is hard, and yet something that I feel compelled to do.
Yeah, and take a business class, take a business course, learn about contracts, and the business aspect of any creative industry. It's always something that I also tell younger folks. I'm like, whatever your creative field is, like learn the business aspect. It's unfortunate. I am
Mhm.
horrible at it, but it's a good thing to have. Now, Catherine, we are coming to an end of our conversation. Is there anything that you're currently working on, and I don't know how much you can say, that you like to plug or mention?
Well, right now I have so just I'm working on some personal projects, some new specs. I am funnily enough, I don't have a procedural sample, even though I've spent my like 90% of my career in procedurals, and my agent was like, you need one. And I'm like, well, what about like the 16 episodes of television? And like, can I just show them those? So anyway, I'm working on a procedural. Trying to make it like again more character based and less um procedurals can just get sticky with
Yeah.
especially in today's political climate. So that's been an interesting line to walk. And I have a friend who's a collaborator who we keep saying, we want to work together someday. We're gonna get like, and finally we're doing it. We're working on a soapy pitch together, which is something a little different for me, which is super fun. But right now I'm just kind of trying to, because I'm not working and have a lot of other things going on in my life, just trying to find things that I enjoy. And what's nice is everything I'm writing right now, I'm really excited about. It's still in the early stages, but like it's fun when you're like, yeah, this feels right, and I look forward to like getting up each day and working on these projects. So we'll see, in the future where those go. And fingers crossed. We mentioned that got to work on Peter Gould's pilot last year. He's like a hero of mine, so that was like just wonderful to work for him. And if that show gets picked up, fingers crossed that we're all back together on that in the new year and working. But we'll see.
Well, sending you all the vibes. And again, Catherine, thank you so much for being on today. And thank you so much for the past couple of years that you've been part of the Disruptors program. Again, you're one of those folks that the fellows are like, Catherine is amazing, and she looks at my work and she gives great advice. So thank you for people like you in Hollywood that are working in the industry and continue to give back. I'm thankful and I'm hopeful as well. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining us today. And for folks watching this, please share this video with everyone and subscribe to the Center for Cultural Power YouTube page at the Culture Strike to see this and other videos from our organization. Thank you so much.